So what happens in this case is this individual winds up going over to Louisiana, and he winds up shooting a father of 7, another Aryan. Long story short, they told this guy to stop communicating with somebody. He said, look, that guy's been my friend for like 40 years. I'm not going to stop communicating with him. He said, oh, yes, you are. We're giving you a direct order. You need to stop communicating with him. And he refused to do it. So one of the Aryan Circle members decided to walk up to him and shoot him in the head. So now I got a body that just dropped.
Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
My name is Rich Boehning.
Rich, and who did you work for?
I work for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
Okay. Can you tell me, where did you grow up?
I grew up in New York. I was born in Queens, New York. I was there until I was about 5 years old. And then, the way it worked in New York, if your family gathered up enough money, you would go out east and you live on Long Island. So I grew up in a town called Brentwood, which was in Suffolk County of Long Island, New York.
Okay. Any brothers and sisters?
I've got one brother and 2 sisters.
And we're going to get into, obviously, your law enforcement career. Did they end up following any law enforcement path?
My brother was a New York City firefighter.
Oh, okay.
And both my sisters are homemakers.
Okay. So I'm assuming New York firefighter, parents pretty patriotic growing up?
Oh, absolutely. My dad was a former MP in the Army. Was also he came from a family of union electricians. My grandfather was a union electrician in New York Local 3, as well as both of my uncles and my dad, who were both electricians.
And is that why your dad was MP? Is that why you ended up going into law enforcement?
I think that was part of it. I think growing up, we go down to the basement, I'd see his uniforms inside, the chest of drawer, and back then they would take their stuff that when they retired or when they left the military, they would be able to take it. And I found the MP brassards. I found, a lot of the MP brass, belt buckles that they would wear, some of the lanyards. So yeah, I think it certainly had an influence on me early on.
What kind of student were you?
Well, I graduated high school with a Regents Scientific Diploma, which in New York was one of the better things that you could have. So I think I was obviously a B+ A student.
Okay. What kind of, you into any sports?
Wrestling. I was a wrestler.
Okay.
That guy wrestled for a bunch of, my town was very well known for its wrestling program.
Okay.
Starting at the very earliest level, like junior high. It was kind of weird because back in the 70s, everybody had long hair. But a requirement to be on this wrestling team is you had to have a crew cut. So imagine getting a crew cut, and it wasn't just a crew cut. It was shaved like right down to the skin. We would just give it to each other.
Yeah. We'd
take the clippers and we'd just, give each other that crew cut right down to the skin and the bare bones. That was part of the this mystique of this particular team. That junior high set like a national record for most seasons without ever losing a match. And this coach that we had, a guy by the name of Warren Walker, was very regimented. It was one of those things where, he kind of reminded us of a drill sergeant. Very disciplined to include our practices. It was a very tough program to be part of. But it paid dividends both in junior high and moving on to high school, and of course I wrestled in college as well.
What weight?
In high school?
Yeah, high school and then in college.
I started out as a 105 pounder.
Oh man!
In college, I wound up being a 177 pounder.
Wow. So, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So 105 to 177 were the weight classes that I hadn't seen 177 in a long time, just by the way. But yeah, back in those days.
Okay, so you decide you're going to college. Where do you end up going to college?
Tennessee, Chattanooga,
okay,
of all places.
Okay. Right. What drew you there?
Well, a couple different things. One, when I came out of high school, the first thing I did was went to West Point Prep School. I actually had a 4-year ROTC scholarship, but my high school wrestling coach said, no, you should go to West Point. And I said, well, okay, but I didn't have the grades at that time, at least the SAT score, to get admitted to West Point, so they sent me to West Point Prep School, which is a 1-year school. At that time, it was in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. Now I believe it's actually at West Point. But basically a 1-year school to learn how to take the SAT and the ACT tests and basically improve your scores. And the way the prep school worked is with 300 students, 150 came out of like high school that were high school athletes, which I was. And the other 150 were actually people from the regular Army that wanted to go to West Point. So it's 300 students that kind of come together, go to this prep school. But in the course of being at prep school for a year, I realized, you know what, I'm not really into this math so much, and it was intense, I can tell you that. So I decided to reapply for ROTC scholarship again, and I wound up getting it. And I said, okay, I'm going down south, but the school is going to have a couple of things. One, it has to have criminal justice because I know there wasn't a lot of math involved in that. Secondly, it had to have a wrestling program because, you know, I was a wrestler. And thirdly, it had to have ROTC, which of course UT Chattanooga had all three.
And because you and I talked before, you wanted to go in engineering, and then you start taking this math class, and you're like, this isn't going to be for me.
No, I don't think I ever wanted to go into engineering.
Oh, okay,
It was
okay.
just that West Point was an engineering school.
Oh, okay.
So as an engineering school, at that time, you had to, you know, there was a lot of math.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just the way it was. If you're going to be an engineer, you got to do a lot of math. And that just really wasn't my cup of tea. I was more of a people person. So more the sciences, the political science type stuff, or the criminal justice programs were really more up my alley.
Okay. Okay. So you end up graduating from college, and you end up joining the military.
Well, not necessarily joining. I signed a contract, right? So
Right.
I was part of it. They paid for my college, so yeah, I had to go into the army.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just part of the gig.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I wound up being commissioned. I was what they call distinguished military graduate. So if you're in the top 20% of all cadets in the country, you're what they call a DMG. So I was a DMG, and you got in those days what they call a regular Army commission if you were a DMG. A little different now, but back then it meant something. So the West Point cadets were getting regular Army commissions. The DMGs from the ROTC programs are getting regular Army commissions. So I was fortunate enough to get one of those, and the branch that I chose and selected was the Military Police Corps.
Okay. So MP right from the very beginning.
Yep. So 23 years old, I'm an MP platoon leader. Correct.
MP platoon leader. So give me an idea of what you're doing.
Well, okay. So let's backtrack. So as
Okay.
an ROTC cadet, you had a couple of opportunities in the summer to do different things. Like, you know, my sophomore year, I went to airborne school, right? So you're jumping out of planes, like, you know, as a 21-year-old cadet. Right after college, I went to what they call the MP Officer Basic Course, and basically that's where they teach you to be an MP officer, and that course is about 6 months. Upon graduating the MP OBC course, I went to Army Ranger School. And the way it worked then is, you know, they would come up with so many slots. And the way the Army viewed it, Ranger School was a leadership school. So if you were in physical condition, and you know, each branch of the military would get a bunch of different slots. So I was fortunate enough to get a slot. So I went to Army Ranger School right after my Officer Basic course. Following that assignment, I went to Korea, where I was in what was called the 2nd MP Company, was part of the 2nd Infantry Division, which was the infantry division that was up on the DMZ in Korea.
So tell me a little bit about what the military brought and taught you that later on translated to law enforcement. And in particular, you had mentioned to me covert versus overt leadership.
So, so the military does a great job of developing leaders, right? I mean, that's kind of what they do, and they do that because there's no alternative. If they're not effective, then we don't win wars, and we're no longer a country. So the military invests a lot of time, money, and effort into developing leaders in their professional development programs. So as I explained to you earlier, from the time that you're a second lieutenant to the time that you're a colonel or a general, essentially you're going to get formal schooling all along the way, right? And they take you, you know, out of the field. They send you to different courses from your basic course, which is 6 months, and then you'll do your advanced course for the MP Corps, which was another 6 months. And they take you from wherever assignment you're at in the Army, and they relocate you to just do formal training. And as you progress, when you're a captain, they have a school which was called Combined Arms Staff Officer School. CASQ is what we called it. Basically, it was 2 months where we went to Fort Leavenworth. And during those 2 months, we learned how to brief, conduct formal briefings, the military decision-making process. You know, we played a lot of volleyball there too, to be honest with you. But basically, it was a school to learn how to brief and how to apply the military decision-making process, as well as write papers and things along those lines that were persuasive in nature, as well as how to conduct meetings, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And again, you used the term earlier with me of covert versus overt leadership.
Right. So when we talk about developing teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're dealing with law enforcement, it's a little bit different. So when you're dealing with cops and people that are, have these type A personalities, and what I mean by that is that, like, I had to build teams to build the kind of cases that I did, right? And when I targeted the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, I think that task force consisted of about 80 guys. When I did the Aryan Circle, we had over 100 people on that particular team. So you have to kind of get everybody to work together, right? And in law enforcement, oftentimes that's difficult. And it's difficult because in the law enforcement world, people are very competitive. The personalities are one of which, hey, look, why do you want this? Are you trying to steal my case? Why do you want this information? So basically, you have to, when I say overt leadership, when I talk about the gangs that I've targeted, essentially what we're doing is I got to get a team. I got to put the right players on the bus. And the way you put the right players on the bus is that you have to establish trust. And the way you establish trust with these guys is that they have to know that they can trust you. You're not trying to take something that they've done and say that you're the guy who did it, essentially. You're not trying to steal their work. So basically, one of the things I teach when I teach this leadership class about multi-agency task forces and complex cases is that you have to establish trust with these other agencies. And the way that you do that is that they have to see that essentially you're going to, take the stuff that they've done and you're going to make sure they get credit for it, right? So that's very important in the law enforcement arena. Once they see that you're not trying to take their stuff, that you're actually trying to work with them, that's one of the ways. And the ways that I would do it oftentimes is that one of the first things I did when I was targeting a particular group is I would build this coalition, I would build this team. And the way I would build the team is I would start off, finding the experts, if you would. And I'd find out who the experts were, and then I'd start putting an email distribution list together or a group listing. And the stuff would get fed into me. I would push it back out. But when I push it back out, I always give credit where credit is due, right? So if I got it from Texas DPS, I'd say something along the lines like courtesy of Texas DPS, and their email would be the first one that, they'd see mine first, and then they would see the one from DPS or the Bureau of Prisons or from the Houston Police Department. And one of the things that we do is that they start to see that, okay, this guy's not taking my stuff, he's actually giving it a platform, if you would. And that's kind of what I would do. I would take the stuff that a lot of folks would do and that they would provide to us. If I had to summarize it to make it easy for the reader, I would summarize the email. Or if I had to go into some of the attachments and kind of summarize what was in the attachments, I would do that as well. But then I would push it back out to the team. And the team would quickly see and learn that, I'm not taking what it is they're doing and taking credit for it. I'm giving them the credit, right? So I give them a platform, if you would. And I can tell you how that was particularly effective in some of the cases I did, because we would bring the analysts on board. And a lot of times the analysts are doing great work in the law enforcement community, but oftentimes no one ever sees it, right? Because they give it to their boss. The boss says, oh, yeah, it's great work. And whether or not he shares it with anybody, no one ever knows. And this was particularly when dealing with the Bureau of Prisons, right? So when I started doing the Aryan Circle case, I learned that there was a lot of great guys in the BOP that would into the gangs that I was looking at, right? They knew all about them, right? Because they have the opportunity to monitor their communications, they can monitor their phone calls. So if I need intel on a particular group, and a lot of the leaders of this group may be locked up in prison, first place I go and get it is to that particular prison and say, look, what are these guys telling their subordinate members? What is it that they're communicating, whether it be email, whether it be on the phone, because they have the opportunity to listen to it, right? So, and there were a lot of guys I found early on, particularly in the Aryan Circle case. It was one analyst by the name of Alan Hartman, who just had phenomenal information on that particular group. And Alan would feed me the information, and I would send it out to the group. And now what's happening is Alan's work is now getting an audience, right? It's getting an audience of not only his boss, perhaps, but also the audience of the circle that I've built or the team that I've built. And that's going to include federal prosecutors, it's going to include agents. So we're getting this great intel, and we're getting this great intel because we're getting the right people on the team. And we're taking the work that they've done or the knowledge that they have, and we're sharing it with everybody else that's part of this group. And what that does is starts to educate the team. And by doing so, everybody kind of knows what's going on. And when folks know what's going on in a case, they can contribute. And that's really, part of the, when I say that's overt, because you're not, you're not demanding anything.
Yeah.
You're just getting them essentially to give their work a platform. And people, people like to be recognized. I mean, people want to, they want to see that the stuff and the work and the effort that they're putting into something, people can actually use and appreciate. And is fairly adept at doing that kind of stuff.
How did you end up with ATF?
So when I was at one of the assignments I had as an Army officer was at Fort McClellan, Alabama. Uh, and I was there probably as a second lieutenant and first lieutenant. After my tour and career for a year, I came back. I was at Fort McClellan, which is now a closed military base, but at that time it was actually the home of the Military Police Corps and the Chemical Corps. But it was also one of the major installations in the Army in the South. But while I was there, I came across a bunch of ATF SRT guys who would train at Fort McClellan. And a lot of us would be in the officers club, on Friday nights or Saturday or so, and we got to meet and got to talk. And I was kind of recruited by a bunch of ATF guys to say, "Hey, look, you need to be an ATF agent." And that's kind of the first introduction I got to ATF. But also guys who were like within CID in the Army were saying, "Yeah, ATF is a great organization." So that's kind of how I got situated towards ATF.
Did you know what ATF did at the time?
America's Toughest Feds, right? Isn't that
Okay.
They told me that's what it stood for, so I like it. So I'm off. Obviously we knew what ATF did. I mean, keep in mind, this is probably the early 90s. This is prior to Waco, but even look, if you're an MP officer, you kind of know because you're getting recruited all the time by different federal agencies. So you knew which were the better ones and which had the reputations for being great places to work. And ATF, back in those days, everybody kind of loved. So, yeah, I knew that obviously they were responsible for enforcing federal firearms, arson, and explosive laws. But the reputation ATF had being a small agency, they were part of, at that time, Department of the Treasury, but they had a great reputation within federal law enforcement of being an agency that did a lot of great work in terms of violent crime.
How do you end up in Texas?
So, so I get hired. My last regular Army duty assignment was in California. I was in Los Angeles, and it was 1999. There wasn't a lot going on in the military, and I had to make a decision because I was approaching the mandatory entry age of being a federal agent. And 1999, there wasn't dick going on in the world, so I was like, you know what? Maybe it's time to kind of leave the Army and go do federal law enforcement. So, Bill Clinton was in office. It was relatively peaceful. It was just didn't look like much was going to happen. So in 1999, I applied to ATF, and I wound up getting the job. And when they hired me, they said, "Okay, well, we're going to move you to Houston, Texas." I'm like, "Okay." I was in the Army. I was moving around anyway. It didn't make a difference to me. But yeah, that's how I wound up. My first duty assignment was Houston, and that's why I essentially stayed my entire career.
Yeah, so you stayed your entire career in Texas. Did you ever think about going back home to New York, or that was off the table?
No. Well, no. I mean, look. So the way it works in federal law enforcement, you have what's called a COLA, right? And Houston had essentially the same COLA, cost of living allowance, as New York did. So it made absolutely no sense to go back to New York and work. I mean, when I came to the Houston Field Division, they told me right off the bat, say, "Look, whatever you do, don't even think about going into management." He said, "Because if you stay here your entire career, which you'll have an opportunity to do, if you stay here your entire career, you'll never have to move yourself. You'll never have to move your family. And basically you'll be making the same money that a GS-15 is making. You'll be at the top of the pay scale," which in fact I was by the time I retired. So I'm making the same money as bosses that are 2 levels above me. So it was like, okay, no brainer. But yeah, that's basically why I stayed in Houston my entire career. It just made the most sense.
So, Rich, when I've interviewed other people who said, "Hey, you got to go talk to this guy," it was a little confusing for me because they always referred to you as Major. You need to talk to Major. So can you talk about how you came up with that nickname, or how somebody gave you that nickname?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny story. I'll try to keep it in the G-rated version, but when anybody that becomes an ATF agent, whenever you go to your initial assignment, you're going to get a nickname. And so I had just left the regular Army as a major, and I came to ATF. And usually it's given to you by the state and local guys that are part of the group that you're in. And at that particular time, it's 1999, I show up, and there was a movie called Three Kings that was out starring George Clooney. Well, in the beginning of the movie, George Clooney is banging this reporter, and she's screaming, "Major Dick, Major Dick, Major Dick." And the guys in the office, I forget exactly what they said, but they said something along the lines, well, you look like you can handle yourself pretty well with the ladies. We think we're going to call you Major Dick. And so it was Major Dick. That's the way it was. So for the first 6 months, I'm running around the office and Major Dick go do this, Major Dick go do that, So it was Major Dick. And my training officer told me at the time, she said, if you can get a nickname you can embrace, then you ought to embrace it. So I said, all right, Major Dick it is. So, but as they started to like me, they dropped the Dick and they just kept the Major. So that's kind of how it stuck. And throughout my career, I mean, if you called this office, if you called ATF and asked for me by my real name, they'd probably not know who it was. But if you said, hey, it's Major there, they would say, oh, yeah, there he is.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Hey, speaking of which, can you talk about your first FTO?
My first training officer?
Yeah, yeah.
Rosanna Tenayuke, the best, a little petite Hispanic female, cute as can be. It's kind of funny. I got the story from some of the guys that were like, hey, look, you're going to get this guy coming in from the Army, he's an airborne ranger, how are you going to handle him? Because she was, tiny.
Yeah.
And, I'm smart enough to know that, I know how to, get to a soft spot. So the first day in the office, I think I remember she introduces herself, said, I'm Rosanna Tenayuke, I'm your training officer, this, that, and that. Rosanna, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I think the first thing I told her was, what do you like in your coffee? I went and got her a cup of coffee and brought it to her. She's like, well, I like this guy already. And her and I got along great. She was fantastic. I mean, she was such a sweetheart that, when you first come to a division, I think I got the worst car in the group at the time. And Rosanna was like, well, that car's too small for you. You can just take mine and I'm going to take yours. And, she was just the best. But a great agent, very thorough and meticulous writer. So I learned a lot from her early on about how to write reports and how to write them the right way. So yeah, I learned a lot from her. She was fantastic.
As an ATF agent, when you're starting out, well, not even necessarily as you're starting out, what are your primary functions as an ATF agent?
Well, as an ATF agent, your primary functions are going to be to investigate federal firearms, arson, and explosive laws. Right? That's basically the laws that ATF is responsible for enforcing. I think there's a misconception out there. Most people think that, I can tell you that the alcohol and tobacco piece is something we rarely do. I mean, if ever. I don't think I've ever handled an alcohol or tobacco case. But that just kind of stuck with us over the years from going back to the Prohibition days. And because we still have laws that relate to alcohol and tobacco and things along those lines. But in Houston, Texas, you're not enforcing that kind of stuff. So essentially violent crime. I mean, that's the stuff that we were going after. Gangs, violent crime, the worst of the worst. I can tell you that, oftentimes, we look at guys, I mean, if they're not the worst of the worst, they're not going to get prosecuted. In fact, we won't even look at them. People often say, well, this guy's a felon in possession. How come you didn't charge him? And I can tell you this, most felon in possession cases, so when I say felon in possession, I mean a felon in possession of a firearm, right? Mm-hmm. That's the bread and butter that most ATF agents are going to be writing cases about, felons in possession of firearms. But because of many different reasons, one of which is the different judicial districts and what they're willing to take in terms of cases, what their capacity is in terms of handling the cases, how much can the court system handle in that particular jurisdiction. We could write felon in possession cases all day, but the reality of it is the courts can't handle every felon in possession case that we took. So oftentimes the local U.S. attorney's offices will establish thresholds and guidelines in terms of what cases they'll take and what they won't. So you're really going to have to be on the violent criminal with multiple convictions if we're going to write a felon in possession case on you. So it's the worst of the worst typically, and that's, like I said, that's due to the capacity of the courts, the local U.S. attorney's office, and things along those lines.
Yeah, so I think there's this big misnomer about what ATF does because there's so many viral videos of ATF guys out there and people are pissed off because they're taking away your Second Amendment rights and come to the porch, try and take guns away and stuff like that. But you and I had a discussion, and if the audience wants to listen to a previous interview with Ron Shackle, ATF, he kind of echoes exactly what you're saying as well. But can you tell the story that you told me earlier about getting the call about the horse guy?
Yeah, so within every agent's career, we get what's called the NICS case. Now, a NICS case is what stands for the National Instant Check System. So when someone goes to purchase a firearm, The way it works in Texas is that you go to the gun store, you fill out the paperwork, it asks you something along the lines of have you ever been convicted of a felony, right? Uh, so in this case, I think the guy came in on maybe a Friday afternoon, and he fills out the form, and he says no, he's never been convicted, right? So then that thing gets sent off to the FBI to do the background check. Now keep in mind, this is probably a Friday afternoon, it's late in the day. The FBI has essentially 3 days to determine whether or not this person is prohibited, right? And if they don't get it back within 3 days, by the time Monday rolls around, the dealer can actually give the gun to the individual, right? Because if they can't get it within 3 days, that's the way the law is written. The individual can come pick the gun up. So this guy gets the gun, right? So in the course of their investigation, the FBI determines that in fact this guy did have a felony conviction, right? And I think what happened in this case is they had to go back to the clerk's office, and the clerk had to go into the warehouse to find the files from a 1962 conviction for horse thievery. So this guy had a horse thievery conviction from like 1962 in Texas. The way we typically handle these cases is the way I would handle them is I make a phone call to the individual, say, look, sir, how are you? This is who I am, Special Agent Boehning with ATF. You remember when you purchased that revolver in this case from the local pawn shop? Well, as it turns out, you still have a conviction from 1962 for horse thievery. And in this case, the guy said, well, geez, he said, I thought that kind of went away after a certain period of time. I didn't even know that would stick around. And that was so long ago. And the guy lived an absolutely, spectacular life. I mean, he had no criminal history after that. So from 1962 is when he has this horse thievery conviction. So I explained to him, I said, well, sir, we have three options. One, I can come get the gun. Two, what I tell him? I said, one, you can give the gun you can take it back to the place that you bought it, right? So you got three options. One, you can take it back to the place that you bought it. Secondly, you could give it to a third party, maybe another family member, and we can do some paperwork that kind of establishes that. Well, thirdly, and lastly, I can come get it. He said, well, the gun was only about $35. Why don't you come get it? I'm like, well, okay. Now, this guy lived way south of Houston, so it was quite a haul to get down here. But I remember going to his house and I walk into his house, and the first thing I see in the living room is this gun case, right, with like stacks of guns in there, left and right, old hunting rifles, that type of stuff. And it's on display, and it's in a glass case, and there must have been 20 or 30 firearms there. And I remember, saying, well, let's talk about the gun in question, which was, of course, the revolver. And he says, yeah, here it is. It's just a 38 special. I just didn't have one. I want something for personal protection. I'm like, okay. So he gets the gun, and I make him sign the form. And he says to me, what about all my other guns? I'm like, what guns? He said, all those other guns in the case. I'm like, oh, you mean your wife's guns? His wife was sitting right there. She's like, no, those are my guns. I'm like, no, I think those are your wife's guns. And they're in the lock and key, and she's the only one with care, custody, and control of those firearms. And she catches on. It's like, yeah, those are my guns. He's like, oh, yeah, those are her guns. So yeah, so it just goes. I mean, the bottom line and the point I'm trying to make is that, we're not out to get everybody's guns.
Yeah.
So the perception that ATF is about to take people's guns is certainly not the case. Now, probably if I was still working, I get jammed up for that. But the point of the matter is, I think a lot of times when you're working the streets like we did, and you deal with a lot of violent guys, I mean, you have to kind of establish, thresholds for what kind of stuff you're going to take. So that, in my opinion, would have been purely harassment, nothing more. So yeah, I took the revolver that he bought illegally, and we kind of went from there.
Yeah. So just real briefly, if you have any opinions about this, but hear things about binary triggers and arm braces and all that other stuff. Is that something that typically an ATF would work on? An ATF agent would work on?
Unless we call agents like that barrel suckers, right? So we used to have the one guy in the office that can answer any question about a firearm. And the problem when you went in and asked them a question, it would take like 4 hours for him to explain it to you. So we got to the point where we told him, hey, look, if you're going to go talk to, and I don't want to name him, but if you're going to go talk to this guy, make sure you got about 4 hours because you can't get escape once you go ask him. But there are the guys, we call them barrel suckers, right?
Mhm.
And simply because they just love firearms.
Yeah.
Most agents couldn't tell you the difference. And in fact, I think there's like YouTube videos that are out there now on different ATF laws and what requires, what is, and what. Listen, it confuses the hell out of me. I can't even imagine what it would be like to the general public.
Yeah.
So yeah, typically, those are within ATF. We have industry ops, which is basically the folks that go around and they inspect the gun deals to make sure the paperwork is in order and doing everything by the book. And then we have the firearms branch, which is up at headquarters. But I can tell you that, when it came to some of those technical issues about what was and what wasn't a firearm, most ATF agents are not going to be involved in that in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Because when you think about it, yeah, it may be a violation, but it's so confusing that oftentimes it's not going to ever get prosecuted, right?
Yeah.
So we generally rely on the public to do what they know to be the right thing, right?
Right.
And whether it's working with firearms dealers or working with people that love guns and have guns and that kind of stuff, but the folks that are real enthusiasts, if you would, about firearms, they know more so than most ATF agents about what is and what isn't because they know the ins and outs.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're not going to see a typical ATF agent, dealing with those kind of cases.
Okay.
And even if someone did have a violation, it's oftentimes not going to get prosecuted simply because they don't meet the threshold, right?
Yeah.
They're not violent people, they're not violent criminals. So we often rely on the public, if you would, to do the right thing.
Okay. So fair to say that during your career, 1999, 2022, you really developed a specialty and knack for working gangs. And in particular, you worked a gang with the Aryan Brotherhood and the Aryan Circle. How did you get interested in that?
Well, so let's talk about the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas.
Okay.
Right. So that wasn't even so although I left the regular army in 1999, I would still stay in the reserve, right? So what happened in this case is I had a tour during the surge in Iraq. I got called up to work in the Pentagon for a year. So I was in the Pentagon for a year. I came out of the Pentagon. I was actually working in Army war plants, which was a phenomenal assignment in and of itself. So I come back to ATF. And I said, well, I think I got information from some folks that there was an individual that was providing silencers and firearms to the Bandidos, which is an outlaw motorcycle gang. And I set up I knew this individual had firearms. And as it turns out, he had 3 burglary convictions in his past. So the way it works, if you have 3 violent felony convictions, which at that time, the state of Texas considered burglary a violent conviction. If you have 3 violent convictions in your past and you are in possession of firearms, you're looking at 15 years mandatory minimum in federal prison. So I knew that this individual was a good target to basically run some paper on him, run a search warrant on his house. And I had information he had firearms in his house. So we ran a search warrant on his house. And as it turns out, we pulled, I think, 3 pistols out of it. And I remember having a conversation with the guy. And again, the intent was not to put him in prison. The intent was to get information about him providing firearms to the Bandidos and then maybe make a case on them. So I remember having a conversation with him along the lines like, hey, look, here's what time it is. You have 3 guns in your house. You're a 3-time convicted felon. You're looking at 15 years mandatory minimum, but that's not how it needs to go. And he said, okay, I'm listening. So I said, hey, I understand that you're might be associated with Jeff Pike, who was the president of the Bandidos at the time, and you might be providing firearms and other things to this group to make them, a little bit more violent. He's like, well, that may be true, but he says that's the least you need to be worried about. What you really ought to be concerned about is a group called the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. And oh, by the way, there's a general in the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas who lives in Tomball. As it turns out, I lived in Tomball. And I said, well, okay, yeah, maybe I should start taking a look at these guys. So the first thing I do, and the first thing any federal agent worth the salt is going to do is you call your state and local guys and say, look, tell me about this particular group. And one of the first phone calls I made was to a Texas DPS agent by the name of Brandon Bess, who I think you may have just interviewed. And he was the expert, if you would, on this particular group. So I said, Brandon, tell me a little bit about these guys and tell me what it is I need to know. So after talking to Brandon and some other experts on the ABT, I decided to refocus my efforts and concentrate on the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas versus the Bandidos.
Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. What are they involved in? What crimes are they known for?
So at that time, the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, I think they were committing all kinds of violent acts throughout the state of Texas. And, we could sit here for hours talking about this particular group, but the reality of it is they're a white supremacist street/prison gang. They originated in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. They were responsible for more murders within TDCJ than any other extremist group. And I think at one point in time, or I know at one point in time, the Anti-Defamation League ranked them as the most violent extremist group in the United States, responsible for more murders and more homicides than any other group. So yeah, a bunch of nasty guys, if you would. I mean, these guys were neo-Nazi white supremacists, and they were creating havoc all throughout the state of Texas.
How do you and I talked about this. How do you go about starting the case? And in particular, one of the most important things you can possibly have in this type of investigation is a federal prosecutor.
Right. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about, as I start to look at these guys, I start to quickly realize that, hey, look, this is a big group. It's operating not only in Houston, but it's operating throughout the entire state of Texas. Right. So it's a group that's widespread in nature. It's just not operating here. And in federal law enforcement, there's a statute called RICO, right? Which stands for Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act. And it's the biggest hammer in the federal toolbox. In fact, but it's very exclusive. Not very many agents get to work RICO cases. And the reason for that is it's a heavy hit. The Department of Justice would rather you use other crimes to target people with rather than using RICO, simply because it is one of those things that can very easily be overused, right? Because you don't actually have to do the killing, you just have to know about it, right? So there's a lot of oversight on RICO statutes. And all RICO prosecutions need to be approved. All RICO prosecutions need to be approved by Main Justice. So although you may be in a local U.S. Attorney's office, they just can't go out and do a RICO case. They can do dope cases all day, they can do gun cases all day, but they just can't do a racketeering case without the approval of DOJ. So it has to be approved at Main Justice. I say that simply to say that it's very rarely used. In fact, less than 1% of every federal agent or federal prosecutor will ever be involved in a RICO case. That's how rare it is. But I knew that we certainly had the potential on this case. And I knew that because I knew they were operating throughout the entire state of Texas. They had a constitution, they had a structure, they had everything that you would need to establish that, one, this group is an enterprise, right? And that it's continuing to operate not only in Texas, but interstate. And they certainly were. So, yeah, I thought, you know what, why don't we start to take a look at this group from a racketeering perspective? And as I said, I just kind of sense. So that's when I started to build the team, finding my state and local guys and bringing them on the team and then just kind of putting them on the email distribution list and saying, hey, look, I need your help with this. Brandon was one of the first guys I met. And he was the one that kind of helped me along those lines with respect to understanding the particular group. So now I start to learn a little bit about it, but I know I need help, right? So now I got to get other people on this bus, right? Because I can operate in Houston, right? But I don't know what's going on in Dallas or San Antonio. So I need guys out in these different locations. So I start to use this covert leadership to bring people in, right? And I started to put them on a distro. And now we're starting to kind of share information. And then as what's happening is I start to have this happen, they start telling me about more people. Hey, I got this guy from this PD, got to bring him in on the group. Get this guy, he's involved. He knows a lot about him too. So now I'm taking what is just me initially and one or two other guys, and I'm building this coalition, if you would, of different agencies. And I don't give a shit what your badge says. As long as you're willing to help out the case, I'm going to bring you on the team, right? And if you got information you want to share with the group, then we're going to share it. I'll be the conduit for that, or you can send it out to the group yourself, whatever the case may be. But so how we build these large-scale racketeering cases is we get a lot of people involved because you're going to have to get the information from all over. And that's what we're able to do. So I call it getting the right people on the bus. So yeah, so you're going through this and you're grabbing these guys and you're making them part of the team. You're educating them too, because not only is it what I know, it's what other people know, right? So guys will have snitches, they'll have this, they'll have that, and they may not name who the snitch is, obviously, but they're going to talk about what they know from their source. So now we got this team of 20, 30, 40 guys who are all starting to collaborate, right? And that's really the key, is getting everybody to collaborate. And that's the toughest thing to do in law enforcement because oftentimes, like I said, people are very reluctant to share information. But once they see that this is bigger and the efforts that they know and the expertise that they have can actually be used in criminal prosecutions, then you're off to the races. So I say that just to simply say now I've got this case, but now I want to get a RICO prosecution, so I need a racketeer prosecutor, right? I need a guy who knows how to do these things. I need a guy who can actually dedicate themselves to actually staying on point and on focus. Now, mind you, the way that jurisdictions work in Texas, you have 4 judicial districts. The Southern District of Texas, which is Houston, the Northern District of Texas, which is primarily Dallas, the Eastern District, which kind of gets pieces of Houston and Dallas, and then the Western District, which is the western half of the state. Now, typically, an agent will only work in the jurisdiction that he's in, right? And typically, an AUSA, an assistant United States attorney, will only work in the jurisdiction that they're in. So we were starting to really put some things together on this ABT case, and we were starting to make some significant arrests, and word kind of floated up to DC that there was a significant case going on in Texas with respect to the ABT. At that time, and I knew all along I needed a prosecutor, and I was looking throughout the different U.S. attorneys' offices to say, hey, look, who can do this, right? And who's willing to do it, because it takes a lot of work. So in what year were you? That's like 2008, right? So 2008, there was an organization in DC called Gang Tech, right? And basically it was a conglomeration of different agencies that they would go out and look for good cases, and they would kind of help facilitate, getting these cases. I remember getting a phone call around, we probably did a bunch of different arrests on this case now, and we got a bunch of guys locked up. We got a few cooperators. I got a phone call from an FBI agent at Gang Tech, a guy by the name of Scott O'Donnell. So Scott calls me, and of course I know he's going to call, so I'm already getting the skinny on him, and I'm making phone calls to the ATF guys that are running this Gang Tech saying, tell me a little bit about this guy and why he's going to call me. And they say, well, it just so happens that case come across the desk up here, and it got assigned to him. It has nothing to do with his agency. It's just that's the guy that got it assigned. So Scott calls me, and he says, hey, I apologize. He says, yeah, I'm Scott O'Donnell. He says, I know I'm an FBI agent, but he says, that's not why I'm calling you. Just this case got assigned to me. I want to help you out any way I can. He says, I can't give you any money. You ain't got no money. He said, but what I can get you is your own prosecutor. And that was just music to my ears. Right. You can get my own prosecutor. You're my best friend. I don't give a shit what agency you work for, right? So he says, yeah, he says, in fact, he says, I think, let's do this. You give us a briefing on your case, and we'll get the prosecutor lined up, and, we're off to the races. I'm like, all right, yeah, that sounds good. And he was a Northeast guy. So I knew right off the bat, I could just tell he was being sincere, he was being honest, because I've dealt with those kind of guys growing up there. So I knew he was a straight shooter. And so Scott calls me up, and he says, yeah, he says, so long story short, DOJ comes down, we give him an orientation. So basically all of the muckety-mucks from DOJ, to include the Gang Tech guys, as well as the DOJ, there's a section in DOJ called Organized Crime and Gang Section. And basically, this is a section where they approve all racketeering cases, but they have a bunch of attorneys in this particular section. I'd say 20 or 30 attorneys, all hotshot attorneys. All folks that went to the best law schools, or they were former prosecutors that had done a lot of gang prosecutions. So really, just some talented attorneys that were either really bright, that were great writers, and they knew how to build these large scale cases. So I remember they assigned me a guy by the name of Dave Carpel. Now, I don't know Dave, right? At the time, I hadn't even met him yet, but I got his name. And there is Google, so I'm going to start searching. And I remember I hit the internet, David Carpel, and I come across this name. And the first thing I see is that he's sitting in a bar, and he's drinking beer talking about a sports game, I thought, right off the bat. And he was a former Navy JAG officer, too. So I said, him and I get along just great, because we're both military background guys, so that's going to be fine. And he was the same rank that I was at the time. So the fact, I knew he was a beer drinker. I said, okay, we're off to the races here on this. So I get this guy, Dave Carpel, who represented the Organized Crime and Gang Section. And he and I were essentially work spouses for the next, almost 10 years.
Yeah.
We worked together on both the ABT and then the Aryan Circle case.
But what was the resistance? In the beginning, we talked about some resistance that you got
Sure.
from the local United States Attorney's Office.
Right. Yeah, so you got to keep in mind, anytime, like I said, racketeering cases require DOJ approval, right? So oftentimes, local U.S. attorneys' offices don't want DOJ oversight, right? They want to do their own thing. They don't want to have to deal with anybody from Main Justice. And truth is, a lot of times in the way the system is built in the United States, is we give our U.S. attorneys a lot of autonomy. And we let them kind of do what it is that they do. And oftentimes they do it without DOJ oversight. Rarely does Main Justice get involved in local stuff. They let the local U.S. attorney kind of handle the business, unless they really need to. So in this particular case, Dave had just gotten assigned to the case, and he's coming down to Houston. He's flying down to Houston every week. We're working hand in hand, which is really, quite frankly, the key to any great prosecution is working hand in hand with your prosecutor. And I said to Dave, Dave, it's probably a good idea for us to go down to the Southern District and, do some additional introductions. So I called up down there and said, okay, Dave and I are going to come down. He just wants to say hello. And so Dave and I hop in my truck. We head on down to the U.S. Attorney's office. And we get into the office. I find the crim chief. And, I let him know that we're here. He said, oh, yeah, I'm glad to see you guys. Why don't you go sit in that conference room over there? So we go in the conference room, and I don't know, it must have been like 12 or 15 local AUSAs sitting around the table. We're like, what the fuck is going on here, right? So it's me, Dave, and Scott O'Donnell, the FBI guy who I told you about from Gang Tech. So we go sit in the conference room, and most of the AUSAs had the seats, so we're just kind of scattered. And then the crim chief comes walking in, and he sits at the head of the table. He says, I don't even know why you guys are here. And he starts to basically berate us. He says, I'm a former FBI agent, and I'm a pissed off, this, that, and the other. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know why you guys even here. I don't know why we need anybody from DOJ to work this case. And he pulls out this sheet of paper and starts to explain to us about RICO cases and how the case against the ABT isn't RICO worthy, and nor will we ever be able to get a RICO case. So we're just sitting there kind of listening. And he says, and being a former FBI guy, he says, how's an ATF agent going to handle a racketeering case? And at that time, then I really loved Scott, because he sat there and said, well, listen, first of all, he said, I am an FBI agent, and you don't need to be an FBI agent to do a RICO case. He said, that kid right there is very capable. He's pointing at me. He says, he's very capable of doing a racketeering case. And so basically they're going back and forth and this, that, and the other. And he's doing it in front of all these AUSAs. So they're all just sitting there listening to it. And they're like, yeah, what's going on here? But basically, we got our asses handed to us. We walk out into the hallway. Dave says to us, and Dave was a very wise guy. Dave was older than me. He was very seasoned, and says to Scott and I, he says, fellas, I don't know if you realize this, but we just got taken to the woodshed. He says, and I can tell you this, we're not going to start this case in the Southern District of Texas. We're going to have to start it somewhere else. Because Dave knew that the only way you were going to be able to do something like this, you had to gain traction. You had to start putting people in jail. He says, and once you started getting traction, and once you start to establish that what you were doing was legit and it certainly had value and potential, then, and only then, were you going to get the attention of others. And that's exactly what happened in the ABT case. We just started putting people away and flipping people. And as I said, Dave was just an absolutely brilliant prosecutor. And, the way you build those kind of cases, the way you build racketeering cases, is you don't just come in and do a big wide-scale RICO. You have to start building other cases. We would do what we call vicars, which are also part of the racketeering statute, where we would do murders and things like that and start locking people up and flipping them, right? And saying, hey, look, you got a choice. Either get on Team USA, you're going to wind up doing 35 years. What's it going to be? Most people were wise enough to say, I think I want to get on Team USA. So you start to kind of, as I say, building blocks, right? You start to put this thing together. And then, of course, after you've done most of the vicars and some smaller scale RICOs, then you come back and do the big RICO for the guys that you haven't gotten yet, right? Because now you got everybody that's flipping and telling you the rest of the story, right? So that's kind of how that stuff gets done.
So did you get your RICO case?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, from 2008 till I retired in 2022, that's essentially all I was doing.
So let me ask you this then. Was there ever, I can only imagine, because I know how some prosecutors are, some AUSAs are. I always worked with really good ones, but I'm assuming you never got an apology, you never got this guy going, oh my gosh, I was wrong, you guys put it together.
No, funny you mentioned that.
Okay.
Because Dave, at the end of the case, Dave decided to frame, he kept that piece of paper, right? So as it turns out, this whole case, we we prosecuted in every judicial district of Texas, but we did the large scale RICO in the Southern District, right? So we wound up, I think it was 2011, indicting 34 that we had not previously gotten. Now we did 73 people totally in this case, but we came back and did a racketeering indictment for 34 individuals in 2011. So what happens is, when the case is all said and done and we wind up convicting 73 in total, Dave saved that piece of paper and he put it in a frame, went back to that U.S. Attorney's office, presented it to that crim chief and said something along the lines, I couldn't have done it without you, and gave it back to him. So yeah, in a frame.
What'd that guy say?
Well, I mean, I don't think he was very happy. What are you going to do, right? That's what it is. You said we couldn't do it. We turned around, we did it. And not only did we do it, I mean, we had said, now listen, the other thing you got to realize is most ATF guys will do felon in possession cases, right? So the max statute on a felon in possession case is going to be 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
We had 73 convictions in this particular case, 6 life sentences. Of the 73 convicted, 47 of the 73, so more than half, received federal sentences of 10 years or more. Those are heavy licks.
Yeah.
I mean, 10, and federal prison is essentially day for day. So yeah, these guys got hammered, and basically it stopped the crime spree that the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas was doing.
Yeah, and just for the audience, I mean, I think this is the general feeling. For guys that are successful that do cases like this, you're not looking for recognition, but I'm going to give you some recognition because, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you got probably most of these awards throughout your career for this case and maybe the other case, but maybe it was this case. But you won the Attorney General's Award, the ATF Distinguished Service Medal, FLIO Investigative Excellence Award, First Responder of the Year, and Special Agent of the Year. I mean, I think that says a lot about the kind of work that you're doing.
Yeah, listen, and I was very fortunate to get those awards. But I will tell you, one of the things that I teach when I do this is because the whole secret of success is building a team and building a coalition.
Right.
So the most pleasure I got out of a lot of that stuff was making sure I was able to bring others along with me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I teach a class on leadership, and I one of the last things and on this particular case, both the major scale cases that I did, I knew I had a lot of guys on this team, right? So 80 on the ABT, over 100 on the Aryan Circle case, but you can't recognize them all, right? You can't take them all up to DC because there's limits,
Yeah.
and there's dollar limits, this, that, and the other. But I always made sure my guys were recognized, and one of the things that I did, and the Army taught me this early on, is Napoleon said a guy will go to hell and back if you just give him a little piece of cloth to wear on his chest, right? So one of the things that I would do is I was adept at PowerPoint, being an Army guy. I mean, we know how to do that kind of stuff. But I would make sure that most of my guys were recognized. So I remember Tom Brandon, who was the ATF director, and there's a guy, Dave Trusty was the chief of organized crime and gang section. You made Dave Trusty, or Jim Trusty rather, Jim Trusty represented Donald Trump most recently early on in his case. But Jim Trusty, brilliant attorney, just absolutely brilliant attorney, and he was running organized crime and gang section. So, and Tom Brandon was the ATF director at the time. I remember wrapping up the ABT case, and I went to both of those guys. I said, look, I want to recognize anybody that's helped us out in this case. And I said, here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to develop the certificate, right? DOJ logo, ATF logo, and I'm going to come up with a narrative. And the narrative is going to be kind of how military awards are written, basically a narrative for what this individual did, okay, on a piece of cardstock, 65-pound, cardstock. So I go out and spend $10 in Office Depot. I come up with these 50 or 60 commendations, right? And they're really looking high speed. And, I asked, would you guys be willing to sign it? And both of them said, absolutely. So I got these certificates of commendation that were basically for everybody that helped out on that particular case, right? And I don't think much of it. It's just that's what you do. And you can give people awards like a trophy or a little thing like this, but if it's personalized to what it is that they actually did, I think that holds much more value than any kind of plaque, right?
Yeah.
So I would make sure that everybody, how they contributed to the case was absolutely recognized. So I did these things, not thinking anything of it. But I come back to ATF, I send them out because it's all across the state of Texas, and I don't think that much is going to happen other than this guy knows that we appreciate what he did because it's so nice. You can put it in a frame. It's just beautiful. And unbeknownst to us, or unbeknownst to me at least, is I would not send it to the individual. I would send it to a sheriff, like to the sheriff. I would send it to the SAC, whoever it was. But realizing that sheriffs are interested in politics, what they're doing is they're holding press conferences for this sheet of this commentation that this individual got, and saying, hey, look, my guy just got an award from the director of ATF and the chief of DOJ's organized crime and gang section, right? And at the bottom of the commendation, it says something like, given under our hand in the city of Washington this 14th day of September 2010. So, again, it was, so that's kind of one of the things I was most proud about, being able to do that in the cases that I did, because it just goes to show, your appreciation for the guys who helped you get where you were on those cases. And I couldn't have done it without any of them. I mean,
yeah, and I think,
and that's the kind of stuff, that's the gift that keeps on giving too.
Right? Absolutely, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it's freaking brilliant because then you got, oh my gosh, yeah, I worked with this guy. Oh, I'm going to do whatever I can to help this guy out.
Right, absolutely. So when I decided to do the Aryan Circle case, I already had half a team in place, right? And I did the same thing on the AC cases too. Now we had a different director at the time and a different chief of DOJ on our crime and county section, but we did the same exact thing on the Aryan Circle case as well.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about the difference between the Aryan Brotherhood case and the Aryan Circle case in terms of what kind of crimes and ultimately what kind of results you got from the between the two.
So again, so I wrap up the ABT case. I think it was 2015 when we got our last sentence. I wound up getting another military tour to DC where I was the provost marshal for the Army Corps of Engineers, and I was up there for about 7 months. So I came back. I said, well, okay, now what am I going to do? Right? I already have the model for how to build these large scale cases because I just did one. Right? So I know how to put these teams and these coalitions together using some of the same techniques I just mentioned to you. Who am I going to do next? So I think someone from Montgomery County here in Texas said, hey, why don't you take a look at the AC? I said, okay, well, I'll take a look. AC was the Aryan Circle, which was another white supremacist gang in the state of Texas. I said, well, okay, I can take a look at it, right? And again, I start going through some of the people that are involved and this, that, and the other. And initially I was reluctant. I said, but it did look like we have a good dope case on them. And at the time I was working over at the DEA and a strike force. I said, well, looks like we can put a dope case on this guy because I had one of the individuals that was running dope back and forth, pardon me. And one of the guys that was running dope back and forth to Louisiana. I said, all right, well, why don't we start a dope case on this group? And I'm starting to do the same thing. I'm starting to talk to folks in the BOP that know about a bit about the group, finding who the experts are, and kind of putting this team together via, the email distros. Then I start holding meetings. And that's another story altogether about how you do the meetings, but we'll get to that, I guess. But as I come to find out, we can tell from the intel we're gathering that one of these guys was very violent, and he's getting out of federal prison. And in fact, one of the leaders of the Aryan Circle was telling his guys, hey, look, Jeremy Jordan's a violent guy, man. You guys got to keep an eye on him out there before he does something stupid. And you're not going to get a racketeering case unless you have violent crime, right? You can do dope cases all day, but unless you have bodies, unless you have violent crime, you're never going to be able to pursue a racketeering because there's got to be bodies. People have got to be dead. I mean, otherwise it's just going to be a straight dope case. And otherwise, you're never going to get the interest of DOJ, nor will you get approval from Maine Justice. Because they'll say, well, it's a dope case, do a dope case, right? But if you have to take down a particular group, then you start looking at racketeering prosecutions. So what happens in this case is this individual winds up going over to Louisiana, and he winds up shooting a father of 7, another Aryan. Long story short, they told this guy to stop communicating with somebody. He said, look, that guy's been my friend for like 40 years. I'm not going to stop communicating with him. He said, oh, yes, you are. We're giving you a direct order. You need to stop communicating with him. And he refused to do it. So one of the Aryan Circle members decided to walk up to him and shoot him in the head. So now I got a body that just dropped, right? And then I start getting more information from BOP about some stuff that's going on within the federal prisons, right? Now, so at that particular time, I'm thinking, okay, I got a bunch of violent crime. I got dope dealing, which is also a RICO predicate. I think I got something here. Now, at that time, I had to swing because I'd already worked with DOJ and OCGS, and Jim Trusty. I called him up. I said, Jim, I'd like to get another prosecutor, and he said, all right, well, brief me on the case. So I gave him. I think I was on the phone for maybe 2 hours. He said, all right, I'll give you somebody. So I sold him the case, and really, that's what you got to do, isn't it? You got to be able to sell your case. And I think Jim had enough confidence in me to say, yeah, okay, I'll give you a prosecutor. And we wound up getting a prosecutor to start up on the Aryan Circle case, which just so happened to be Dave Carpel again, right? So we had worked together. So now, so the difference between those two cases is that the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas was primarily focusing in Texas, right? A lot of stuff they did was in Texas. What I found out about the Aryan Circle, although they originated in Texas, hell, we just had a body drop in Louisiana, and there was other stuff going on throughout the country. So I had the Aryan Circle case took me up to St. Louis, up in Missouri. It took me up to New Jersey. It took me, we started looking at stuff that was happening in 10 different states. In fact, on that prosecution, we wound up prosecuting in 6 different states. So we didn't just do it in one, I think overall it was 10 judicial districts in 6 different states. So we did racketeering prosecutions in 6 different states on that particular case.
How many arrests did you get out of that one?
43 defendants. All were convicted. And like I said, we did RICO cases or racketeering cases in 6 different states, and they were Missouri, New Jersey, Texas, Mississippi, how many is that? Kentucky, and let me think, is it 5? And Louisiana. Yeah, so 6 states.
Did you handle anything differently running that case than the other? I mean, we talked about how you handled meetings and stuff, but you were obviously, the whole goal was to put together the team. Did you handle anything differently than you did the Aryan Brotherhood case?
I think that, so now let's talk about meetings, for example.
Yeah.
Right? So you talk about the covert leadership, wherein you're out there, you're basically putting this team together, you're establishing trust, you're establishing that, hey, look, this guy's not taking this stuff to kind of take it for his own use and then cut us out, because no cop ever wants to have that happen to him, and nor should anybody ever do that to an officer or a cop or another agent. So now what you do is you hold a meeting, right? You formally hold a meeting. After you get your team, you communicate with them for a while, you have an actual formal meeting. And I can tell you that being a military officer, one of the things that they taught us is that, you've got to have your act together when you put a meeting together, right? And so I would take a lot of skills I learned as an Army officer and I would apply it to running the cases. And what I mean by that is I would set the room up a certain way, right? So I would have a U shape, right? Because I want to establish collaboration. I want people to feel like that, I often say if you set up a room that's like a classroom and all these cops come into the room, the first place they're going to go is to the back. That's just the human nature. They're not going to come up front. They don't want to be put front and center. So you got to make it to where they're actually in this particular U, right? Now, the meetings I had would oftentimes be about 50 or 60 people, right? So you have to maybe set up 1 or 2 U's, but your primary team is going to be in that center U, right? And you're focused on a screen where you're going to conduct a PowerPoint presentation to kind of use to guide the meeting, if you would. So I often call it theater. You're putting this team together, but now it's an opportunity for you as the case agent to actually establish overt leadership, which is, hey, look, this is the case. This is what we got going on. So I make sure my prosecutors are sitting at in the middle of the U. They're seeing what's happening. And meanwhile, you put an agenda up for the meeting and you're starting to kind of go through some of the things that are happening, but you're doing it with visual, right? So you've got pictures involved. You've got, maybe some vignettes. You've got videos that you may have taken from people. So not only are you telling the story, because that's what you have to do. You want to sell the case to the prosecutors, right? But you also want to keep them informed, right? So instead of them having to read 10,000 ROIs, I'm giving them a down and dirty in a meeting about, hey, here's where this case is. Here's what's going on. Here's where we're headed, right? And then, so you're telling the story using PowerPoint. You keep your meeting on track, but you're also, at the end of the meeting, I'll have, the different agencies. So I'll go around the room and figure out who's there. I already know because most times they tell me in advance, and ask each and every individual if they had anything to participate or rather anything to add to the case, right? So everybody's getting buy-in. So what you're trying to do is you're establishing buy-in with not only the prosecutors, but buy-in with the other agencies. And you want them to walk out at meeting saying, wow, that's a pretty good case. I want to be part of it, right? And I think there's an AUSA by the name of Chris Ramp. He tells a great story. I worked with him on the Aryan Circle case. He came to the first meeting, and he is a brand new AUSA. And Chris comes into the meeting, and of course, it's one, I've done almost 40 of them, right? So I know how to do this by now. And Chris is like, man, I like this federal shit. These guys are squared away. They know what they're doing, right? And he's like, I hope every case goes like this. He quickly found out they don't. But the point is, it was taking the stuff and the skill set I learned as an Army officer to kind of just apply it to law enforcement. And I often say, if you're the guy who puts the PowerPoint together, you're the guy in charge because no one else wants to do that work. And I will tell you, as I explain to agents when I teach this, is it takes a lot of work. I mean, you got to put a lot of time and effort into just putting the PowerPoint together for the meeting, right? Because that's a big tool for keeping everybody on the same page, keeping the meeting on focus, and educating the team, which is really the most important thing. You want them to all walk away as now force multipliers for your case. Hey, I know what they're looking for, right? And they'll start coming back and telling you more stuff. So yeah, that kind of thing. And the same thing with, like I said, the analysts and getting them involved, right? And, once they see that people can appreciate their work, they're more apt, they're more apt to giving you more and more.
Yeah. Before I ask you the last 2 questions that I always ask, can you tell me about your first arrest with ATF? Machine Gun Mike?
Yeah, that was a case I would probably never ever do again. I think what happened with Machine Gun Mike, he went into an FFL, and hell, I had not. So ATF's a unique organization. It's not like this now, but I remember. Let's before we talk about that, let's
Yeah.
talk about my first day on the job. Right? So
Okay.
the first day on the job,
Okay.
I'm an Army guy, and we're everything in the military is accountable, right? You show up after a shift as an MP guy, you turn in your pistol, you turn in your bullets, and everything ought to be in there. First day on the job at ATF, they're like, okay, yeah, you were in the military, right? Okay, yeah, okay, so let's go get you some guns, right? They give me a badge, they give me creds, and then we go to the arms room. He's like, okay, all right, yeah, take one of these, take one of these. So they give me a 9 mil pistol, they give me a revolver, an ankle revolver, they gave me an MP5, AR-15, and I think a shotgun. I'm like, holy shit! And then how much ammo do you need? They just give me buckets and buckets of ammo. I'm like, where the hell do I keep this stuff? I just put it in your trunk. Just put it in your trunk. I'm like, what? So yeah, it was kind of, but that's how it was. I mean, now ATF does a little differently now, but back in those days, yeah, keep it in your trunk. You might need it. Was what I was told. So yeah, it was kind of how it was.
Yeah.
That was it. But yeah, Machine Gun Mike, back to him. It was just a simple felon in possession case, but Rosanna wanted me to see how the process went, right?
Mm.
Machine Gun Mike was unfortunate to have to be on our target list, but he was. And yeah, he basically, he wasn't in possession of a machine gun, but he told everybody that when he was in prison, he would hit people so hard and so fast, they called him Machine Gun Mike. So that's why we gave him the nickname Machine Gun Mike. But yeah, I think it was just a simple felon in possession where he lied on the form and got a gun, and it was something that wasn't really spectacular.
Yeah.
Certainly wasn't a racketeering case.
Yeah. Certainly not what you did later on in your career.
But I'll tell you the other thing,
Yeah.
interesting, like, because you being a former DEA guy, right?
Yeah.
So DEA, in both my cases, I always had a DEA partner, right? That was my ATF and DEA work so well together. And the reason we work so well together is because DEA doesn't want to dick around with guns, and we don't want to screw with dope, right? So you guys take the dope, you take the guns, we're off to the races. We're not even in competition.
Yeah.
But in both of those cases, we did do T3s, and at least some circles in ATF say, oh, yeah, we got to do a T3, we got to do a T3. We as an ATF need to do a T3. Well, we're not equipped to do T3s. I mean, truth be told, they may tell us that we are, but we don't have wire rooms, we don't have interpreters, we don't have any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And we don't have anybody doing line sheets or things along those lines. So, I remember, well, you know what, that's just a dumb idea. I'm not, so we did wires on these cases, but it was always my DEA partner that would do the wire. And they paid huge dividends. We go to the DEA wire room, it was good stuff. But again, you have to put the right players on the bus. You have to know what it is that they can help and provide to the case, and you gotta use their specialties. So with like the DEA guys, I would always be my wire guys.
Yeah.
So I mean, and DEA would get impatient because there'd be stuff like, well, when are you gonna do it? But racketeering cases take a long time, so the bosses are like, well, when's someone going to jail? Ultimately we got there, but yeah, great partners, the DEA and ATF.
Yeah. Everybody's impatient until the arrests are made, but how about long hours? I'm assuming with these cases you're putting on, what's the effect on your family? Any negative effect?
So I'm not the kind of guy that goes home and talks about work. It's just not something I do. I mean, when I'm home, first of all, it's to go reiterate the day. It's just not, I just don't do that. So oftentimes, I think my family knew I was working long hours. Obviously, they didn't like it, but they also understood that was my job and that was my profession. So that's just kind of what it took. And I had total support. And the same thing with like Dave Carpel, my prosecutor, right? I use him for an example. I mean, I think on the ABT case, there was a couple of times where he had to get protection, right? Because of threats and things along those lines. And he had a great wife as well, Wendy. And Wendy was like, hey, look, they were actually, if you recall, in 2000, we did the big RICO indictment in 2011. In 2012, there were some killings in Texas of prosecutors. I don't know if you remember, that was Kaufman County, Texas.
Yeah.
But they wound up killing. So what happens is we indicted, I think, October, November of 2011, the big case. There was a source in the prison system saying that the ABT was going to retaliate against law enforcement. Then in early 2012, I believe, maybe it was 13, within 6 months of the big indictment, whether it was 2012, 2013, I believe it was 2012, a local assistant or district attorney's office, a local ADA was killed in Kaufman County, right? So in Texas at the time, everybody thought it was related to the ABT because of the threat that had come out. So if you go back in time to the news and who is the ABT, what is it they're up to? Now, as a case agent, I'm like, it just doesn't sound like them. That's not something they would do because it's not what they would typically do. But the national media was all over it. And they were like, oh, yeah, the ABT. So they wound up killing this ADA in the middle of a small town in Texas, and everybody thinks it's the ABT. So that's when the Marshal Service is getting involved, and they doing protection for the judges and the prosecutors. And then within 2 months of that, the actual DA and his wife wind up getting killed in Kaufman County, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you can imagine, the pucker factor is pretty tight. Everybody thinks that, this is ABT again. Now, as it turns out, it wasn't anybody related to the ABT, but needless to say, that kind of stuff puts a toll on families.
Yeah.
Wait a second, if you're in the middle of this case, and that's what these guys are doing, it can kind of raise some suspicions of some eyebrows for something about what's going on. But yeah, I mean, my family was always supportive. I didn't tell them too much, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just one of those things.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
How about looking back on your career when you started to even now? Did being in law enforcement affect the way you see people?
I always try to see the best in people, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that, mind you, I've dealt with some of the worst. But even in dealing with a lot of these guys, I think one of the reasons we were so effective is that we always treated, no matter who it was, whether it was the crooks or anybody else, with dignity and respect, right? So, I've always told like ABT members, for example, hey, look, if you don't want to talk, that's fine. But I'm going to be straight up with you. I'm going to tell you exactly what's happening. I'm going to be a straight shooter. And I'm going to tell you, what the choices are. But, so even I say in dealing with them, I mean, they could respect that you would, and it's all about respect. I mean, I don't care who you're dealing with in life. I mean, it's just a matter of dealing with people with respect and treating them the way you would want to be treated if you were in similar circumstances. I can tell you, with respect to ABT, I can see where a lot of these guys had true leadership skills. Whether in all the gang cases I did, where you had the hierarchy and the leadership, you could see that these guys could just as well have been either agents or CEOs of companies or things along those lines, because they did truly have leadership ability. But I can tell you that most of the times that they get down the wrong path with either narcotics and they start getting spun out on a dope and making bad and bad decisions and exercising poor judgment. And that's oftentimes how they wind up going down this path of being a criminal. But as far as society is concerned, listen, I mean, being a police officer nowadays is a lot tougher than what it used to be. Simply because of, I think, just the spotlight that's on it and some of the negative reviews that we see from a lot of different things. But it's still a great profession. I mean, I love doing it. I often say if you have a job you love, you never work a day in your life.
Right.
And that's true. I mean, I don't think I ever worked a day in my life, whether it was military or being an ATF agent. It was that enjoyable.
Very true.
So,
Major, thank you very much for the interview. I really appreciate it.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.